So the first type of elasticity that we need to look at in this topic is price elasticity of demand. As I said in the last video, this is the one that I suppose gets the greatest airing in terms of A-level economics. It crops up in quite a few topics as we work our way through. And as before, remember, we were talking about elasticity, and we said that it's all about responsiveness. So price elasticity of demand is measuring the responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in price. Now, if you remember, we saw earlier on with demand that it has an inverse negative correlation with price. That means when the price of something goes up, demand for it will fall. So what we're talking about here is how much demand will actually change when the price changes. So as far as A levels are concerned, we know that as price rises, quantity demanded will fall. Elasticity tells us, I suppose, the answer to the next most important question, really, which is by how much. So we know that there will be a reduction in quantity demanded because we know that the demand curve slopes downwards. What this is telling us is that as the price rises, by how much will quantity fall? And I'm going to demonstrate this with three little examples. So let's have a think about these three examples. So what I've got for us here are some fresh tomatoes. Down here I have cinema tickets, and up here I have petrol. Now when you start thinking about these, it should become quite clear that there are various different relationships between the quantity demanded and price going on here. So let's kind of think about these individually and see what we can come up with. So let's start with the petrol. Now, when we think about petrol, remember what we're thinking about here is how much does the quantity demanded change when the price changes. Now, what we would expect is that with petrol, there is not much change in demand. And the reason for this is that for most people, buying petrol is somewhat of a necessity. Certainly, you know, I have to buy a certain amount of petrol to put in my car so that I can drive to work every day. So for me, most of my consumption of petrol is not really through choice. I need to use it. I might reduce my quantity a little bit. You know, I might drive a little bit less at the weekend, or drive slightly less far, or you know, if the price got really high, then then I might kind of consider cycling or getting the bus or something like that. But for the most part, a change in price is not going to have much change in demand. On the other hand, fresh tomatoes, if there is a change in price, will tend to have a relatively large change in demand. You'll notice this actually quite a lot, because if you're in supermarkets, then fresh tomatoes tend to be on offer quite regularly. We'll have a look at that a little bit more in the next video. But with fresh tomatoes, they tend to be something that people buy, sometimes as relatively an impulse buy. So it's just something that they'll grab, and therefore, if they are cheap, they are much more likely to do that. Cinemas tend to have what we call a proportional change in demand. So what this means is that the change in demand is roughly the same size as the change in price. So if prices rise by 10%, demand tends to fall away by 10%. So let's have a think about how we actually measure these in numerical terms. Now, this is quite an important thing to learn with price elasticity of demand. Calculating values is quite a common question, and then interpreting them, again, is a very common thing for them to ask you in an AS exam. So, formula for PD is the percentage change in the quantity demanded, that's what the QD means, divided by the percentage change in price. Now, what I want to emphasise here is that when you're talking about these, you need to talk about the percentage change in quantity demand and the percentage change in price. So this is not the change in demand, this is the percentage change in demand. So you must make sure that both the changes are expressed in percentage terms. You should be familiar with how to calculate a percentage, but just in case you're not, the way we calculate a percentage is we take the new value minus the original value divided by the original value, and then we multiply that by 100. So if you are given the changes in actual numerical terms, you need to convert them into a percentage like that. Once we've got that, then let's just think about what we've got here. So we've got the percentage change in demand on the top and the percentage change in price on the bottom. Let's think about it in terms of our three examples. So remember, we had our tomatoes, we had our petrol, and we had our cinemas. Okay, and let's just think about what that means for each of them. Now, with the tomatoes, we said that the demand will be quite responsive. So the percentage change in quantity demanded will be quite large, and certainly will be larger than the percentage change in price. So a relatively small change in the price leads to a much larger change in quantity demanded. Now, if we've got a bigger number on top of a smaller number, so a larger number up here than we do down here, that means that the actual PED value that we are going to get here is going to be greater than 1, because it means the number on the top will be larger than the number underneath. So, let's say, for instance, the percentage change in quantity demanded was 10% and the percentage change in price was 5%, then the PED would be 2. But certainly if the quantity demanded change is greater than the price change, then the PED will always be greater than 1. Petrol, we know, goes the other way. Petrol operates the reverse of that. So for petrol, if you remember, my quantity demanded of petrol remains relatively constant regardless of what happens to the price. So this on the top here, the change will be much smaller than the change on the bottom. And what that means for petrol is that the PED will be less than 1. Now, for cinemas, if remember we said that the change there was broadly proportional, so the change on the top is going to be roughly the same as the change on the bottom. And if the change on the top is about the same as the change on the bottom, you've got one number divided by itself, which is going to give you an answer of 1. And this kind of highlights, I suppose, the three main ways that we consider elasticity in relation to price. If the PED is greater than 1, we refer to the product as having an elastic demand. If it's less than 1, we refer to it having an inelastic demand. And if it is exactly 1, we refer to it as having a unitary demand. And that's how we should refer to these. Now, there is also a degree of kind of flexibility within each of those. So for our tomatoes, for instance, the further PED goes beyond 1, the more elastic we say that product has become. So a PED of 3 is more elastic than a PED of 1. And a PED of 5 is more elastic than a PED of 3, and so on. The higher the number gets, the more responsive demand is becoming. Similarly, with inelasticity, with petrol, the lower the number becomes, the more inelastic it is becoming. So as that PED value approaches 0, it's becoming more and more inelastic. If it reaches 0, then we actually say that it is perfectly inelastic. And what that means is that there is no change at all in quantity demanded, regardless of what happens to the price. Now, one of the things that does tend to get people a little bit caught out with PED is whether the number is positive or negative. Now, if we think about this, we know from what we've seen in previous videos that quantity demanded and price are inversely related to one another, i.e. as one goes up, the other goes down. What that means is one or other of these will be negative always, because if the price is going up, i.e. the percentage change in price is positive, then we know that because demand has an inverse relationship with it, then the percentage change in demand will be negative because it will be falling. And that would be true the other way around as well. It would be negative on the bottom and positive on the top. Now, what that means is you are always going to have a positive and a negative there. And if you divide a positive and a negative over one another, regardless of which way around you do it, your answer is always negative. So PED values are always negative. Because they are always negative, we basically just ignore the negative sign. So you may well see it written like this, with essentially a negative in brackets in front of the number. So just put this on a new slide for. So as far as price elasticity, only price this refers to, the other elasticities it does matter. But if we have a PED of, let's say, 1.5, just a quick bit of revision, that means that the product is elastic, relatively elastic. You may see that written as a PED of negative 1.5 or a PED of negative in brackets 1.5. All of those mean basically, well, as far as we're concerned at A level, they do all mean the same thing. So when you're talking about the PED, just be a little bit careful. Sometimes people get a little bit confused because they think about the number in the kind of the sense of the first one here on the list, the kind of the 1.5 without any negative, and then suddenly they get in the exam and they see this or this and they panic, and they try and interpret it as demand rising as price goes up, or something like that. So just be aware that all of these three things, as far as we're concerned at AS, mean the same thing. And all of those things mean that the product is elastic, which means it's responsive to a price change. Okay, now the next video is going to show how we show that on a diagram, and also why this actually matters to a business. So why is it important for a business to actually know what the price elasticity of demand values for its products are?